when in the development of law have we ever seen corporations protecting or acknowledging human rights?
Oh, never.
This was the whole, if you dig long enough, this is the whole underlying undercurrent in all of those developments, great developments within Anglo-Saxon law and jurisprudence.
Yes.
So, we have to wake up, and I've said it on other shows, we have to take a real long, hard look at this whole notion of the corporate person in law.
Okay. Now, explain that to the audience, because a lot of people might not understand.
The idea of the corporate person in law is a theological doctrine.
Yes.
It comes from Christian theology of the medieval Western Church.
Yes.
That's where it comes from. And the doctrine holds that individual persons united in a common function constitute a person. So in other words, person is defined by functionality, number one. And the reason it comes from theology is that doctrine that underwrites or underlays the Western notion of original sin, in that you can inherit the moral guilt and responsibility for someone else's sin. So in other words, when Adam and Eve fall, they transmit in the Western doctrine, please understand, it is not the doctrine of all of Christendom, but in some form or another, this is the doctrine of all Western Christian churches.
Oh.
Bar none. You hear Baptists talking about sin nature, you hear Roman Catholics talking about concupiscence, but what they're telling you, each and every last one, is that you inherit a moral culpability for Adam and Eve's fall. You are born into this world guilty.
Oh.
And therefore, please pay attention to the financial logic. You are therefore in debt.
Yes.
So what does the atonement become in Western Christian teaching? It becomes the payoff of an infinite debt owed to an infinitely offended God. And the only way you can do that is to have God become man, because man owes the debt, but he's not infinite, therefore he can't pay it.
Yeah.
So in other words, you see, what you're dealing with the whole doctrine, the whole theological doctrine, is really, if you strip away all the pious religiosity to it, you're dealing with the idea that mankind is a chattel, is an asset.
A slave.
Yes, an asset. Please understand what I just said, an asset onto which debt is attached. This is exactly the teaching of the modern corporation when it views you as human resources.
Yes.
Not as personnel. You see, it's a very medieval notion. This is not new. This is not new. This is very old.
Oh,
so strip away the religiosity, get your noses out of the Bible, and stop and think what's actually being said and who, therefore, you are actually beholden to. It isn't God indebting you, because it's a false teaching to begin with that one person can by dint of the sexual act, embrogle anyone else in their own moral decisions.
Yes.
You can inherit the consequences of... That's a different matter. You can inherit the consequences of someone else's decisions, certainly. But you cannot inherit the moral culpability. You don't inherit the red ink on the ledger book.
That's right.
That is one of the greatest errors, egregious errors of Western Christianity. And the logic, if you stop and consider what I've just said, Georgianne, the logic isn't even Christian at all. It goes right back to those societies that were making human sacrifices to appease the wrath of the gods.
Yeah.
There is no moral difference between the two. The only moral difference that can conceivably be fastened to it is the notion, at least within Christianity, that the sacrifice of Christ is a perfect sacrifice and thus puts an end to all the others. But the principle remains the same. You have an angry God demanding the death, an infinite payoff of an infinite debt, and so his own son has to die.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me that makes moral sense.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. And that's why I was never a Western Christian.
Wow, Joseph. My goodness. My goodness. Well, it makes sense, what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, if you're going to read the Bible, then be literal. In the day that you eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, ye shall surely what? Have a sin nature? Be guilty of an infinite debt? No, ye shall surely die.
Yeah.
The consequence isn't moral, it's physical.
Yes. Oh.
And you can, Adam and Eve, if you look at the story that way, yeah, the moral culpability falls upon them, but the consequence falls on everybody.
Yeah.
But not the moral culpability. There's a difference.
Yes, there is.
And, I suspect I'll get all sorts of angry letters from people that are of the other persuasion. But, I don't care because, number one, I'm not given to complimenting or commenting that much on theology. I'm doing so here only because, really, the theology is nothing but a thinly disguised form of social engineering in the form of economics. That's what I'm saying.
Yes. Yes, and if people really, really think about it, open-mindedly, really think about it, you're right. You are right.
Yeah, this is something that was pointed out by the early Greek church fathers. When they were wrestling with this issue, and they quickly rejected the notion that this whole debt idea was even operative.
Yeah.
There was, there in the Eastern churches, there really isn't any equivalent of any Western doctrine of the atonement at all. Oh. There are different, so to speak, there are different schools of thought about it, but none of them really anything near what becomes the formalization of Western scholasticism. So, yeah, it's a very different thing. And again, I point out that in principle there's little difference, if any, between that understanding of the atonement within Western scholasticism and those pagan cultures that were actually practicing human sacrifice, because the reasons for doing so are the same.
Oh, well, there's no difference than what the modern corporation...
That's my point.
Yeah.
That's my point. It is, this is all medieval. This is all medieval.
Oh, gee.
All this talk about the Dark Ages, and we finally emerged from the Dark Ages with the Renaissance. Baloney.
Yes. Yes. Oh, Joseph.
The Dark Ages are alive and well.
Yeah.
In the thick-headed, cinder-blocked-brained corporate executives that are talking about global corporations and world serfdom.
Yeah.
That's exactly what their thinking is medieval.
Yes.
In all of its barbarism.